The iPhone 17 Air is now only 6 months away and it's by far the most exciting new phone we've had in almost a full decade, with a bunch of new features and updates that are honestly making me consider buying one instead of the Pro Max that I always buy every year. The only problem is that the Air was apparently supposed to be a lot more special before the EU had to come and screw up all of Apple's plans. But before I explain what that means, I want to go through the top 10 features and changes that are making me so excited for the new Air. Getting right into number 1, it's the brand new redesign with a horizontal camera bump bar, which of course looks like the Pixel 9 Pro from Google, but I love it. Google, good job. I love your idea for the camera bump redesign. I just love how the Air looks with it moved up at the top. I personally hope it does not have black glass, but instead has color matched aluminum. And the one thing I like a lot about it is no more camera bump wobble. CAD files and renders are out and it looks amazing. We just got this new leaked case showing off the camera bar, and we even have dummy models that have shown up revealing a bunch of interesting things that I'll mention in this video. The craziest is that the camera bump bar will apparently stick out 9.5 millimeters, which is mind-blowingly big. But the big question is, why is it so thick? Why does it stick out so much? Well, that brings us to feature number 2, which is rumors that this will be the thinnest iPhone ever, measuring just 5.5 millimeters at its thinnest point, just slightly thicker than the 11-inch M4 iPad Pro, which is 5.3 millimeters. And I'm sure that as soon as you take this into your hands, it'll be a magical experience that you won't know until you feel it for yourself, instead of just looking at the renders or looking at Apple's introduction video, and people might fall in love on the spot and choose the new Air. And just look at this image of the leaked dummy models. Look at how thin the Air is, especially compared to the Pro Max, which is supposed to get even thicker. The difference just looks insane. Now for update number 3, we're gonna be getting a 6.6-inch display. That's actually pretty cool because it's a middle ground between the current 6.3-inch Pro and the 6.9-inch Pro, which is honestly perfect because to me, the 6.3-inch model is too small, but the size of the 6.9-inch is a little bit annoying because it's hard to use with one hand. I almost feel like I'm gonna drop it every now and then. And apparently, Apple was planning to make the new Air bigger with a larger 6.9-inch display, but they were worried about it bending, so they made it smaller, just like Bendgate from the iPhone 6 Plus from many years ago. And I'm actually glad they're going with the smaller size because it makes it more unique. Now for number 4, there were a lot of worries that Apple removed MagSafe on the 16E to help save room for a bigger battery, and since the iPhone 17 Air is so thin, everyone was convinced that Apple would remove MagSafe, but thankfully they won't. There's new dummy models that just showed up that show that the 17 Air model will in fact come with MagSafe as well as the action button, so it's fully featured and it's not gonna have any weird compromises, which is a really big deal for those who might wanna choose the new Air over something like the Pro Max. Now moving on to number 5, the new iPhone 17 Air will have 120Hz Pro Motion, just like the full 17 lineup is supposed to have. That is awesome because I can only use a Pro model because when I go back to a regular one with 60 Hz, I notice the glitchiness right away. It's no longer as smooth, especially for animations like the dynamic island or the camera control coming up. You can see how it's glitchy, and you really only notice it after you get used to using a 120 Hz Pro model iPhone for a while. And once you do, it's really hard to go back. So I'm glad that we don't have to worry about that on the 17 Air. It's gonna feel just as smooth and have 120 FPS gaming. Now for number 6, the general consensus was that this new thin design would lead to a battery life sacrifice, just like the mini models from a couple of years back that had noticeably worse battery life, and that was the number 1 drawback. But apparently, Mark Gurman claimed that the battery would be surprisingly good on the 17 Air, on par with the current iPhones, which sounds impossible, but he gave us 3 good reasons for why. Number 1 is that it's gonna have Apple's power-efficient C1 modem, which showed up on the 16E, and that was a big reason for why the battery life was so good on this new phone. Number 2 is that Apple's apparently gonna put in a higher density battery, better than what we currently have, which is great. Maybe some new battery technology to make this happen, like maybe solid state or something else. And number 3 is that it's gonna have a lot more internal space for a bigger battery due to removing one very specific thing, which brings us to number 7. Yep, the iPhone 17 Air is gonna have a single main camera, which means there will not be an ultra wide, which frees up a bunch of space on the inside for a bigger battery. And at least the main camera on the back is gonna be 48 megapixels, so it's gonna have great quality with the 2x zoom option, which does look good. The only downside is that a lot of people actually prefer to have multiple cameras, according to a recent survey of people who asked if they would upgrade to the new 16E. The biggest reason not to was the lack of more cameras. But at least the 17 Air has the excuse of being insanely thin, so it might not be as big of a deal. Now moving on to number 8, we have the new A19 chip, which is more efficient and likely enough performance to support 120 FPS gaming with that 120Hz display, even on such a thin device. And thankfully, the current A18 chip isn't actually too far off from the A18 Pro. The performance is still really good, which is great news with the iPhone 17 Air with the new A19. It's also gonna have 8 gigs of RAM for better multitasking and Apple Intelligence support, and hopefully we actually get some decent AI feature updates with iOS 19. Now moving on to number 9, this is a big one, 24 megapixel selfie camera on the front. I was actually worried that because of the thinness, Apple wouldn't be able to put this on the new 17 Air like they're planning for the entire 17 lineup, but nope, Apple is gonna make sure it gets it, probably due to the super thick camera bar, but still, it's gonna be really nice. And right now, selfies are currently one of the biggest camera pain points on iPhones that we have compared to competitors, so I'm really excited to see how these new 24 megapixel selfies turn out. And finally, for number 10, the iPhone 17 Air is rumored to get Apple's own custom designed Wi-Fi 7 chip, which should give us a big boost in efficiency that'll lead to better battery life. And the cool thing is that it's gonna work hand in hand with the Apple C1 modem, so it'll be likely more reliable switching between Wi-Fi and cellular, like when you leave the house, much quicker on the fly, more reliable. And there's a lot of potential new features Apple can bring since they have control over the iPhone, the software, and the chips themselves, so definitely exciting times. And as for the price, it's rumored to be $900, which is basically the exact price of the 16 Plus that we have, so it's basically replacing that with a display that's almost as big. And finally, let me get into explaining how the EU ruined Apple's plans to make the iPhone 17 even better. Apparently, this new Air model was supposed to be the very first completely portless iPhone. Yes, portless, using MagSafe for charging and maybe even for data transfer. But no, Apple was worried about EU regulators giving them a hard time for not including a USB-C port, so they decided to hold off and put in a port which will apparently be off-center because they need room for the display panel, which is gonna look a bit ugly in my opinion. So if they had left out the port, it would have probably been even thinner. But the good news is that Apple is still planning a future Air model that will be portless. So with that said, those are the 10 top features and changes for this new iPhone 17 Air, and I'm super excited. Definitely subscribe for more info and more leak updates. Check out one of those two right there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.